So welcome to this new episode of the podcast with Reyes Group. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to someone who is extremely knowledgeable in what is happening from a global perspective. So please welcome Joe Nellis, who is the Professor of Global Economy at Cranfield University and Cranfield School of Management as well. Joe, welcome to the podcast today.
Robert, pleased to meet you.
So, Joe, we've had a few bits of conversations before about what's happening with the generations. And there was something that piqued my interest a while back, which was your take on Gen Alpha, which is this new generation. So can you tell us a little bit more about them and how we identify them and some of the characteristics that they have?
Sure. Gen Alpha, is the latest generation to be so called as a new generation. There's no precise demarcation as to when generations start and end, but roughly every 15 years is the time span of a generation. Now, Generation Alpha has been identified as a new generation since March 2010, which seems rather precise, but there's a reason for that. Because in March 2010, the iPad was launched. Right. And this is the first generation born into a digital world. And for them, digital is normal. But for the rest of us, we've had to adjust to it. And I'm still adjusting to the digital world. So Generation Alpha, being a new generation, the question is this: how are they going to be different from previous generations?
Right.
As consumers, as workers, as members of society, as people who are so close to information, the search and knowledge, the hunger for knowledge and information like never before.
Yeah.
This generation is going to be, I think, much more in tune with what's happening in the world. And so the big question for companies is, how are they going to attract them as customers and as employees? How are they going to retain them as employees? How are they going to motivate them? But it also is a question for government, because this generation is going to be much more, as I said, aware of what's going on around them. Mm-hmm. So what about the environmental challenges we have? What about the societal challenges? How will this generation respond differently to these challenges is the big question.
Right. So there's so much to unpick there.
Absolutely.
Let's start from maybe the beginning then, right? So, and I think because this is more or less geared towards businesses, if we started off with attracting Gen Alpha to your business to work for you they're going to be coming of age, in the next 5-ish years,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So what do companies need to do, or what do they need to be aware of to attract those types of people into the workplace?
That's a great question.
And actually, what will the workplace even look like in the next 5 years? Because there's a big 2-letter thing that's happening right now, right? AI. So, yeah.
No, a great question, Robert. And, we are speculating, because this is the future, and the future is not certain at all. Mm-hmm. But let me give you a sense of what my views are around this. Look at me, for example. I mean, at my age, I've had what might be called a linear career. I've been with one university for 40 years,
right.
Which is, relatively unusual, but not completely unusual. Mm-hmm. Generation Alpha, I think in their mind, the concept of working for a company for 40 years will just be alien.
Yeah.
So how will companies attract these people? I think they're going to have to offer them a career that is full of variety, of choice, of challenge, and perhaps one that I might summarize as project-based work. In other words, give them a project, whatever that means in each sector, but keep them busy, keep them thinking, keep them active, because they'll want to move to the next project and the next project and the next project.
Right.
Failure to motivate this generation, I believe, will result in a big turnover of staff.
Right.
And the talent pool will move. Mm-hmm. Now, this is speculation, but I think common sense tells me that this is what's going to happen. I can't imagine somebody born into a digital world sitting at a desk, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I can't even imagine that today, by the way, post-COVID. The world is hybrid.
Yes.
But I think the world of Generation Alpha, yes, is hybrid, but in a way perhaps we haven't even imagined yet. So I think it's going to be exciting for the generation, but challenging for the employers to recognize that to get the best out of these people, they're going to have to work hard to keep them, well, thinking, excited, motivated. And that's the big issue, I think.
Right. I definitely, like you said, I'm starting to feel that already.
Absolutely.
The transition is already, in a way, happening as we speak.
Irreversible in many ways, I think.
Yeah. I don't think, in terms of the world of work, it will ever go back to being anything less than hybrid.
I agree.
The majority of people, unless they physically had to be present, let's say like hospital staff or something like that,
Correct.
There is, there's no way around it really.
But even hospital staff, by the way, with AI, you mentioned AI, remote operations, remote diagnostics, remote consultation, that's happening already.
Yeah.
That will expand, I think. So another development, it's going to affect all of us.
Yeah. No, I was thinking more like the manual, the physical type of thing.
Sure.
So with all of the issues that are going to be compounded by the fact that Gen Alpha want to do project-based things and not necessarily stay at a company for an extended period of time. And you mentioned about being able to keep them motivated. What you were saying about, first of all, let's go back to the first bit, which is to attract them in the first place. What kinds of industries are going to be attracting Gen Alpha? Because surely not everyone can, be in fields or areas of work where you are just going to have project-based tasks which are being done, project-based work effectively. Sure. So what about those things that do require, more extended periods of time or longer commitment cycles? So say, for example, years as opposed to just maybe weeks or months.
Good question, and a difficult one to answer in a clear way because, again, I'll repeat, it's speculation. I can envisage, and perhaps this is a sad prediction, but different groups of workers forming. Those that have the talent, those that have the capability of moving from job to job with project type skills, they'll be very mobile and they'll be in demand in many sectors. But there will be other sectors, as you've implied, that won't require that, won't want that, and they will want somebody for X number of years to do this job, this physical job. And the question is, what's going to happen to the lifestyles and the rewards and the motivations of these two groups? I think the danger is we could end up, and AI will accelerate this, I think we'll end up with a lot of people at the lower end doing menial jobs, some of which will be replaced by robots, of course. And the question is, how are they going to get out of that situation? I don't see this as all Generation Alpha having the same opportunities. So, skills development, training, IT skills, having this ability to cope with projects is going to be quite special. And in particular, I think there will be the lucky ones within Generation Alpha who will love complexity. They will embrace complexity. It won't be for everybody, but those who love complexity will love it because their challenge is to convert complexity into simplicity. I think the most successful people and most successful companies are those who are able to make complexity seem simple.
Right.
As we're seeing with many aspects of our lives today.
Sure.
I mean, even recording a program on television 20 years ago was very complex. Now it's a QR code or whatever. It's a very trivial example.
Yeah.
But those members of Generation Alpha who love these challenges of dealing with complexity, sorting out processes and making them simple, I think they've got a wonderful future ahead of them. But it will not be everybody. And that's the key point I'm making here.
So where does that leave new businesses? Because it sounds like what you're talking about are things that are already existing.
Correct.
So does that mean that we'll have less new businesses coming to the fore because existing businesses would have already made the adoptions and then started to grow and effectively hoover up all of the talent pool that's already there, which makes it harder for younger, I suppose, more mobile business to come through and thrive.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, actually. I think there's huge scope for new businesses to be developed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, it's almost up to our imagination as to what we mean by a new business. It may not be manufacturing nuts and bolts, for example.
Right.
But, in the service sector, I don't have a vision of a limitation on new businesses.
Right.
Since time began, we've had these innovations, and I don't see any limit to that. It's our imagination, I think, will be the limiting factor. But again, Generation Alpha will see the world differently. I think their imagination will be so heightened by what's around them and looking for solutions to technical problems. I'm actually optimistic about this, not pessimistic.
Very.
Again, and I think the talent pool is not just a UK talent pool; it's a global talent pool. And to put that in context, by the way, just on a global scale, it is estimated. Of course, this may change slightly. That since 2010. The number of newborn babies globally is about 2.5 million per week, approximately. If you do the math quite quickly, by 2025, the Generation Alpha could account for up to 2 billion people, approximately.
Right.
And by 2025, the world population, well, it's already over 8 billion now in the last few months. So they're going to head towards a quarter of the world's population. This is going to be a very large, although relative to previous generations, it's going to be smaller, but still, nevertheless, relatively large group in society globally. So I think I'm, being very positive in my outlook. I think previous generations, Generation Z and Y, I think they got many more challenges they face around the world today. In terms of debt, in terms of the cost of living, in terms of housing. I think Generation Alpha, their expectations will be different, and that's the key point. And I think they're going to see the world as an opportunity to make a difference. Now, that sounds very ethically minded, but I'm hoping they're going to be of that ilk.
Right. And when you were saying about some of the differences, I guess, between Generation Y, Z, and Alpha, do you think Alpha, by the sounds of it, are going to get the best of the pie? Because it seems like Generation Y and Generation Z, like you said, are going to be a little bit more, they will have structural debt as part of their inheritance, so to speak, from whatever we are doing right now. How do you think they're going to react to that? Is there going to be some sort of resentment going on here, or?
Well, as I said earlier, it's not a demarcation line, so these generations merge into each other.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't want to be too definitive, but I mentioned Generation Z, and they're often described, by the way, as the iPod generation.
Yeah.
iPod standing not for a musical device, but for insecure, pressurized, overburdened, and debt-ridden.
Right.
If you just think of the current generation of students at university and leaving university, and the debt they're now taking on, not only in the UK, but generally. I think that they are a generation that had a pretty tough time. They've lived through, the recent crises, the global financial crises, the tension around the world. They're living through that now.
All the COVID as well.
And the COVID, of course, absolutely. So I think, Generation Alpha will inherit some of these problems. Of course, not everybody will be, equally well off. But I think the mindset will be different. I think Generation Z, expected to have a prosperous career. I think the world has moved on, has changed. The tensions have built up. The debts have built up. We've had it very good for a very long time. My generation had it very, very good. But I think Generation Alpha come to it with I think a different perspective. I mean, they're still children at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think their expectations will be different. And for them, the expectations are not about owning a house, having a lot of money, traveling around the world. It'll be about, society. It'll be about environmental issues. It'll be about the gap between rich and poor. I think it'll be much more about things that really matter to many of us today, to all of us today.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I'm being optimistic. But of course, the world can change as well. very quickly.
Yeah.
And I just hope that some of these predictions do come, to be true.
Yeah.
I would like the next generation to be better off than the previous generations. That's been the case traditionally. But Generation Z, we think, is going to be the first generation to be less well off than previous generations. Although money is only one measure of well-being, of course.
Yeah, and success.
And success, yeah.
We talked about having Generation Alpha coming in as into the business to work. But what about them as consumers? And then also off the back of... Actually, what about them as users? Because they're more users of things. Yeah. And then what about them as customers as well?
Yeah.
How will that work, do you think?
Yeah. And I think we're seeing signs of this already with previous generations. I think people today, younger people today, are far more sensitive and aware of brand and the value of a brand and the ethical stance of a brand. I think that's a really critical point. Because social media has exposed them to a lot of the information much more.
Yeah.
And I think Generation Alpha, like no other generation, will respond to ethical issues much faster than previous generations. I say it's blending into one, but I think Generation Alpha will be so much aware of what this brand means. And it takes decades to build up a brand globally. But it can take seconds to destroy it. And people walk away from your brand. And I think Generation Alpha will be the generation that will force change on companies to be ethical, more ethical, to consider the environment even more than previous generations. I think that's a good thing, by the way.
Yeah.
So as consumers, I think they'll be much more savvy, much more knowledgeable, much more aware of all of these issues, and will vote with their feet and with their pocket. And the same applies to governments, by the way. Societal changes will take place. Attitudes to immigration, attitudes to poverty, attitudes, as I said, to the environment. So governments will also be exposed to these. I won't call them pressure groups, because this is a huge part of society in the future, and the generations that follow after that. So I think this is a good thing, by the way. But it does mean that companies, both, as I said, as employers and as providers of goods and services, are going to have to be much more in tune with what society wants and needs and expects. And I'm so, I'm so positive in this sense that, companies will sink, or swim based on this. And that's a good thing, by the way. Off air, example I would say is, imagine if, and this is off air, if Apple was discovered to be employing children in sweatshops making their phones, they could be out of business tomorrow. And that's a good thing that would happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to quote any particular brand. So, but it's that type of example I'm referring to here.
Yeah. And same thing, like what you were saying about how quickly a brand can get destroyed.
Yeah.
When you look at the Chadjpt debacle,
Correct.
which happened over the course of a weekend.
Last 6 days, yeah.
Right. For such a heavily capitalized business, which Microsoft is pretty much like part owns the whole thing. But in terms of share price for Microsoft went up, but in terms of whether someone would feel confident enough to put their information now into ChatGPT, and like, let's say, for example, if ChatGPT said, yeah, we'll make the most private, secure thing ever, I just wouldn't trust them.
A good point.
And it's a simple reason is because of the governance structure of the way how it works.
I think an even better example was in the last few days was the cryptocurrency story.
Yeah.
The
biggest company that handles cryptographic currency. Just fraud. It's all based on fraud. Yeah, it was all some smokes and mirrors, and Sam Bankman-Fried as well. And
these are current examples. But just multiply this and go through time, and think of more and more companies that think they can get away with behavior that in the past was acceptable. They'll be exposed, and that's a good thing for society and for future generations.
I'll tell you what we're doing as well, Joe. We're building out our company very publicly with what we're doing with this AI idea stuff. I want people to see it from the inside in and be able to trust it. And that not just goes for the people who work internally, but also our potential users and customers. They could go in and see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And if they can't, then they're never going to buy into the fact that we can protect their data.
Yeah,
and they're never going to buy into the fact that it's a brand, like you said, that has got reputation at its core built in.
Absolutely.
Of course, you can't tell everybody everything, all the, who is a potential investor, etc. That kind of stuff needs to be confidential. But for everything else, from an organizational perspective, should be open, right?
But you've raised very helpfully the word trust, by the way. And if I can just reflect on me for a moment, and generations after me, as I was growing up, there were certain institutions which we trusted, which actually formed the bases of our lives, such as, well, politicians, the police, the BBC, and certain brands. These were the brands that, and these institutions gave us foundations that we trusted. Well, look what has happened in the last decade to trust in certain institutions, in politicians, in the BBC, in the police, and these are very topical issues, sadly. And therefore, I think these institutions and organizations and companies, if they don't wake up and realize the changes that are taking place in society, perhaps faster than they could imagine, then they're going to have huge problems in the future, much faster than in previous generations. So I think it's something that every organization has to be aware of, and that, including especially companies, for example, selling garments. That's another very topical issue. The buying cheap garments. Why are they so cheap? Where are they being made? And then we're dumping them. This is going to be very strange in the future. So exciting to think what it will look like, but it's going to happen faster than we could have expected. The pace of change is the key point here. And I mentioned this idea that brands can be destroyed very quickly. Well, the internet has killed distance 100%. Everybody in the world now is connected. So one problem here today will be known globally within minutes. And that's the impact here on brands and on, well, all of us.
So in that regard, do you think like reputational crisis management, are those the types of areas of work which are going to start to become a lot more necessary and more integral for brands to grow? The big ones? It's
an intriguing thought because, you see, you asked that question, in my opinion, as if it was 20 years ago, because that was the case then. That they put in place, companies had in place people who dealt with reputational damage. It's too late. So I would say that's in the future. It's too late. By the time you're trying to repair your reputation, you're out of business.
You're gone.
So the only question is, do you want to die quickly or die slowly as a company? I think it's not about reputational damage. It's about not creating damage in the first place.
Got it.
And I would do things right first time.
So culturally, the business has to be structurally built out, culturally bulletproof at the beginning.
Not reacting, but actually proactively making sure your reputation is not damaged by something you've done. And because it's going to be out there. So, but your point is a good one. I remember it very well. I remember examples of things like Mars bars. They had some injection put into them, some poison. Reputationally, it was about 40 years ago, huge damage to their brand. And that can still happen, by the way. That's a different issue. But I'm referring here to how companies behave, how they react. Covering things up is going to be very, very difficult.
That's very, very true. There's very little that you can cover up these days,
very
right?
Little. So don't try. Do the right thing first time.
Exactly. Well, that's actually really, really interesting to me, but also for the way how we're building our company as well. It's we you can ask Sam, we put culture straight away at the beginning, and culture only comes out of values that people have, which have to be in them from day one. It's not like, and also how we behave with the people that we bring on board.
Absolutely. So, it's great to hear that. And I think that's, all companies need to think and behave that way, but we know they don't.
We
know they don't.
And especially all, like you said, all the existing companies, they would have had so much stuff that there's so much in the closet basically right now that if they were to come out and say X, Y, Z, it would probably be shooting themselves in the foot. But I don't know, actually. Is that something that companies need to think of, like coming clean with some of the practices that had happened in the past?
Well, it may well be the case that they have to come clean. It wouldn't be a bad idea, by the way.
Yeah.
But just to highlight that, if I may, existing companies, and I'm being a little bit critical here, but most companies, they tend to recruit people in their own likeness. Still. Now the danger with that, and there's nothing wrong with being, looking like me or looking like you, but if they keep doing that, they actually reinforce the existing DNA in the company, the way they think, the way they behave, the culture, the ethical position. And I think what they've got to realize is they've got to bring in more diversity. And that's not just about color or sex. It is about age, it's about experience, about backgrounds, because that diversity changes the DNA of organizations. It makes them think differently and behave differently. And I think the next generation, the opportunity for companies to bring in the next generation as soon as possible when they're of an age to work, to actually reinforce that change in their culture. We don't always have to do things the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's the wrong way.
Yeah.
Or it's the non-ethical way.
Yeah.
Or it damages the environment. Why can't we change the way we behave?
Yeah.
And that's what I think the next generation will actually accelerate. I hope. That's my aspiration, is that this happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, the environmental issues, for example, the problems are building up faster than we expected.
Yeah.
And we're going to leave behind, or I'm going to leave behind an environment that is not going to be the best that we could have done. The next generation are going to have to sort this out.
Yeah. It's very, very true about the whole environment thing, because, that is existential, not necessarily for us. We'll last,
That's right.
for another 20, 30, 40 years. But by that point, what we're talking about is about the next 50 to 100 years into the future is when it will literally become a struggle for survival in a way.
It could be, absolutely. Well, for many people it will be, especially the coastal areas around the world, of which there are many people who are going to be displaced.
Yeah.
Where are they going to live? Question mark. Borders could come under pressure. Movement of people.
So in a way, are we saying that Gen Alpha are going to be living in that era, but have hopefully the technology in order to be able to fix it? Or are we saying that they are going to be wholly unprepared for what is to come?
Well, that's a difficult one. My hope is that they're going to be much more aware of the issues and more prepared to make the changes that are required. In other words, willing to change more than previous generations.
Got it.
Let's take some trivial examples, and I don't want to trivialize this.
Sure.
But I still am confused when I go to certain shops and I see things wrapped up in plastic.
Yeah.
I think, why are we doing that? Next generation, I think, well, let's not go there.
Yeah.
So that will change. The shops will change. It's a very trivial example. It's our plastic straws. I know these things are changing, but not changing fast enough. I still find it strange that we're not doing the things that we could do today, which would really not change our lives fundamentally. It wouldn't be that difficult, but companies are still doing what they've always done. Still. Some companies. I think within 5-10 years, when this generation becomes, as I said, the shoppers, the employees, the voters, let's not forget that. They will be voting with their feet like never before, I hope.
Yeah.
And that's my aspiration.
You touch on a really good point there, because it's not only that they're voting with their feet, but they're literally voting with their feet, as in they might decide not to live in a particular territory or country because they don't like the way how it operates from a governmental perspective, and go to somewhere else where it's a bit more ethical, etc., right?
If they can go, if they can move, there are borders, of course, and global migration is and will be a global problem.
What do you think about what's going to happen with the electoral systems that we have built up around the world? How is that going to be impacted?
Wow, now we're into a global issue here. First of all, I still find it very strange that in this country, we have a voting system where you put an X in a box. That is Victorian era style voting. I've just come back from a country in Africa where it's electronic. in Africa. So I think, first of all, the voting system is going to have to catch up with the 21st century in terms of technology. And that is an opportunity for many governments perhaps to start to re-engage generations into voting. But there is a problem. So even if you had an electronic system that was foolproof, etc., and identity checks were held, the question is, will the next generation be willing to vote? Are they going to, ignore the politics? I don't know the answer to this, because this is up to governments, I think, to do something to re-engage people. How are they going to feel that they're part of society and they're able to change society? In many countries, if you take the USA as an example, you tend to have a two-party system. You're one or the other. And in the middle, you're the squeezed middle.
Yeah.
So I think there is a challenge here for governments. I actually don't know what's going to happen in this respect, because it depends on what governments do. But I think they're going to have to re-engage people in every country, and that might even, in some cases, mean, and it already is the case, where voting is compulsory. I think that's the case in Australia, if my memory is correct, for example. And that's not a bad thing, although pressure is not always a good thing. But if you're part of society, I think you should be contributing to it by voting. So that may well be the case. We move towards compulsory voting, for example. And let's face it, as the years pass, governments in every country, they know a lot about us. They're capturing information every day about us. They know where we live. They know what we earn. They know what our family situation. So actually, it won't be that difficult at a stage to say, by the way, we require you to vote and we know where you are, so please vote. That's not a bad thing, I don't think. They can't force you to vote for. But I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to, quote unquote, encourage all of us to vote. And then generations are going to have a bigger say on what happens. And I would like to see that. So Generation Alpha, I think, could be engaged in the voting process, perhaps through compulsory voting, but through the way we vote, through technology and so on. I think that's certainly possible, and a vision I think is easy to put up there.
Right.
So going back to the voting issue, really, it's, if I just think about it, putting an X in a box requires you to go somewhere, get out of your house, maybe go in your car, which again may be a rather unusual thing, go to a booth, queue up perhaps outside, somebody checking your identity, and then putting an X in a box. And then it takes maybe 24 hours to count these votes. This to me is what I call Victorian style voting.
Sure.
We could in 30 seconds describe the 21st century voting system.
Yeah.
And just to be provocative, why not a microchip in your finger? Ooh. Which is permanent, which is your ID.
Yes.
And why not do it from home on your phone or any device? This would be very easy to implement today if we wished. But as the years go by, I think these things become much easier to imagine and to implement. And please don't put this on an air, we microchip dogs and cats. But we don't microchip our children. And yet they might be kidnapped, they might get lost. We microchip cars. So I find it very strange that we microchip the things that aren't really that important. But we don't microchip things that are important.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily trying to be too futuristic here.
Yeah.
But it would be very easy to move to that. And then you've got a passport system, an ID system, a voting system. Within 10 years, you could revolutionize the engagement of people in the voting system, I think.
Yeah. So not biometrics, but implanted.
Well, it could be biometrics. It could be, of course. It could, sorry, it could be. Sorry, you're right. Of course, you're right.
Yeah.
I was just giving an example.
Yeah.
One that was meant to be provocative. But
No.
Biometrics.
I get it. I mean, I definitely would understand that you need that level of authentication in order to be able to do anything.
And Generation Alpha will find this much more acceptable.
They'll be like, "Yep, that's fine. It's in my thumb or wherever."
Whatever.
Yeah,
our biometrics.
Just go like that.
Yeah.
Done.
And I think, therefore, the probability of them voting will increase if we make it easier. And results coming through, immediately the voting closes.
Exactly. And you make exactly the point, like you said, right? It shouldn't take more than maybe a few minutes once voting is done for all, because you would have had a running total count.
Of course.
And everybody would be able to know what it is. Well, you wouldn't want everybody to know what the voting is.
Not in real time.
Because then
that would affect
would affect
correct.
the outcome.
Correct.
But
correct.
whoever's in charge of the whole thing should be able to still see what's going on in the background, right? So we've got we touched on businesses, we touched on attracting Gen Alphas as workers and employees, and then we talked about users as well as consumers, and then we jumped into the lovely issues of politics. What other areas, and I guess to an extent we talked a little bit about sustainability and environmental the environmental outlook that Gen Alpha will have, and also the predicament that they will be in, because it will be a lot hotter and more flooding taking place. But I mentioned something which is like they may be unprepared for it mentally because they've got historically mum and dad's money in mum and dad's house. What kind of things, and are they going to be easier to influence because they have groupthink and they're... I've seen things before, right, where you have a lot of people who are, in effect, kind of, and this is something that a lady by the name of Chimamanda Adichie spoke about, and she was talking about the world of literature and the fact that books nowadays have become boring, primarily because you aren't allowed to say certain things. There is a sense of social censorship that we impose on ourselves because we feel too scared to approach those topics, which happens as a result of the way how social media has curated our behavior. So I understand where she was coming from. She was saying, like, would books like, books by Salman Rushdie, for example, ever have seen the light of day in terms of publishing? Because right now it probably wouldn't have. No publisher would have wanted to have released something like that. But her argument was that the world would be far poorer from a literary perspective if views and different points of views were not visible. And in that regard, when people are starting to think collectively around the world in a groupthink sort of way, whether that's a good or a bad thing. And I don't know what your thoughts are. And for me, I mean, I always think of the level of the individual, but thinking collectively as a whole. But there is a tension, a natural tension between that.
I understand the point you're making very well, and it's a very topical subject. I think there's two different categories here. There's literature, or things that people write that are of an offensive nature, and clearly I think that's wrong, where it's intended to offend. And I think it's good that we rebel against that and society changes its attitudes. So anti-Semitic literature or anti-feminism or anti-gay, whatever it may be, I think it's wrong that we cause offence. Of course, there's other literature, which is creative literature, and I don't think that's going to stop. I mean, the example you gave of Satanic Verses with Salman Rushdie, the older example would have been Lady Chatterley's Lovers. You remember that? It was banned at that time. So that will always be the case. There'll always be examples of literature that isn't intended to offend, although people may take offence. That's a different point, by the way. So it's an intentional and unintentional offence. I would hope, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I would hope that we still allow the space for creativity in literature, and we don't suppress everything. But I'll repeat what I said, but literature that offends intentionally surely should not be permitted. Now, the question is, how will Generation Alpha respond? And the point you're making is a very good one. Are they going to change their behaviour to write nothing that may cause offence and that therefore may suppress creativity? Or will there be other ways to be creative without causing offence? I mean, I think this is about our imagination. Can we visualise a time when we actually can write about sex or about politics or about religion that doesn't cause offence, but makes the point you want to make? Now, I lack the creativity to do this at the moment, but you know, and I'm not a crazy optimist. I think the future generations will be aware of this issue more than I've been aware of it. And I think that's a positive message for the future, but only time will tell. How this pans out is a really good point you've raised, and it isn't going to be all, you know, rosy in the garden. There will be tensions that will be different from the past. And, you know, did we intentionally do this? Did we not intend to do this? And that's going to be a big debate, but has been around for some years now, and will continue. I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah.
Fascinating, by the way.
It is actually, because
I understand it very well.
Yeah. I did think about that, and I was like, you know, she does make a really good point, or which is that, you know, if you don't make space for people to say what they think, even if it is offensive,
well, Elon Musk is of the same view, you know, but
what happens is that when you do it in public, so and the other one was Trevor Noah recently, right?
Yeah.
So Trevor Noah said something along the lines of he went to a bunch of parties and stuff like that, and he said the majority of the people that he spoke to would come up to him and said, well, I wouldn't usually say this in public, or I wouldn't blah blah blah, but this is my view on XYZ, right? And then he thought to himself, well, why is it he didn't have one, but he had multiples of people effectively socially censoring themselves from saying something in public? So they wouldn't do it on social media, but they would be thinking it, and then they would be more comfortable sharing it on a one-to-one basis.
I think it's a huge issue. I mean, I don't want to minimize this, but again, trying to be positive, can we imagine a generation of the future that is able to express its views in a way that everybody can listen and understand there are different views here without taking offense? That's a big ask, but that would be the ideal, that I can say to you or say to Sam or anybody, make a statement and you're not offended by it and you accept it as a difference. Today, that's not the case. Today, we very much see things, you know, I was going to say, I didn't want to use the phrase black and white, you say, but for that reason.
Very binary,
Binary.
Yeah.
But it may be that this will never change. Maybe there'll always be those tensions, and this next generation we're not going to solve every problem. They're not going to change and become, you know, robots in their behaviors. I think I stressed it earlier, and a phrase I think I've used with you before, Robert. In every single person, there is a creative gap, and it's the gap between the performance they achieve and what they could achieve. And that's my sort of take on this. I think we've got to create room for creativity to flourish, and free speech, you know, has been the sort of the label of this in the past. It may be something different in the future, but maybe we all learn that free speech is good, but not necessarily the way we always did it. You know, I can say what I like to say. Well, no, you can't. But you can say it in a different way. And I think I'm learning that already. I mean, in my subject, by the way, years ago we'd have talked about the black economy, the underground. I said, by the way, I don't want to hear that anymore in my class. You know, let's call it the underground economy. And people now get that. It's about language. I'm getting the same point across, exactly the same point, but the language is different. And I think that's the point I'm making here. That our language may change, but what we mean may be exactly the same thing. But that's just wishful thinking, perhaps.
I think one of the values that we have in our company is inclusion.
Absolutely. I would hope so. In every company, but it's not true in every company.
But my thing with it, right, is that inclusion to what extent? Because you can't be inclusive of everything that everybody says or whatever, right? They might be like, you know, I don't like that other person, etc. But you still need to include me.
That's right.
And that's where there's always like lines.
It will be. It's how we express what we say, what we think. How we and does it cause offence? You know, and that's the question. If what you say causes offence, some will say, well, that's not my problem, that's their problem. Well, actually, that's wrong these days. It's how it's perceived by the person receiving it. That's what matters here. And therefore, if what you say causes offence, and if it does cause offence, you apologise. And in my book, that's the end of the story. You know, but if you think, well, no, I'll say what I want to say because it's a free world, isn't it? You know, that's a sort of Donald Trump type mentality as well. You know, well, I think that's going to change. That is changing, but it has to change more.
But Trump is not a new phenomena either, right?
No.
And that's what I think people are drawn to as well. So
That's true.
The fact that he seems to break the mold in terms of being able to say what he wants, does what he wants, in a way gives people a sense of vicarious living through him. They want to be doing the kind of things that
that's dangerous. And that's dangerous.
Exactly, because we can't do everything that we want to do. We can't say bomb, bomb, bomb in a packed full audience of loads of people, because everybody would rush.
Hitler came to the fore, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Populism.
But the problem with it right now is that as much as we're saying this, if you just look at the Amsterdam election...
I've been watching it this morning.
Was that this morning, right? Where we have a lot... It's a right-wing populist...
Anti-Islam, anti-immigration guy. He's now the majority... the biggest party.
Yeah, for a country as like
liberally
Amsterdam,
minded as... Yeah.
And this is where I'm kind of going, okay, what's going on here? Why is it a place that I could go and smoke weed or, you know, and there's red light districts and all that sort of stuff, has a problem with a religion? And why is there some sort of a...
This is no different from Brexit, by the way.
Yeah.
Exactly what happened in Brexit. Somebody, you know, I won't mention the names, we all know who it is, showed images of lines of immigrants and the bus, remember, the NHS, and they just stirred up sentiment, populism. History shows that there, you know, individuals do pop up from time to time, and I think that always will be the case. And sadly, at this time and this place, as I said earlier, I think we're living in a particular time with a lot of tension around the world, and that breeds this type of behaviour. You know, the extreme on either side, by the way, extreme right wing or extreme left wing, and that will always happen. That will always happen. Next generation. Well, I mean, I'm not trying to dream this, but one would hope they're a more inclusive society. You would hope, but no guarantee of that.
Yeah.
You know, no guarantee of it. That's why it's a lot of speculation. We don't know is the answer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is quite a big topic, that one. I think it's...
And a risky one, because if we talk about it, we can drop ourselves into a label. That's the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was coming back to the social censorship.
Yeah.
There should be,
a good phrase.
there should be freedom to kind of explore topics within a certain space. I think
freedom to explore, freedom to express without intentionally causing offence.
Yeah.
To me, that's...
Without disrespecting. That's the thing. And that's also our value as well here.
Yeah.
So we have, I guess, two values which are they have a tension with each other, which is inclusion, but also respect. Yeah. Because you can't include everything that is disrespectful. Yeah. It has to be both.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So,
and I think, your generation definitely very much part of that. Next generation, it'll be just the norm. One would expect. They will expect that to be the norm. Now, globalization is a phrase we talk about in terms of trade. Well, that's maybe reversing, but actually globalization in terms of social media, that's getting bigger. And therefore, I think that will drive out some of these bad behaviours.
Yeah.
And it's happening. It is happening. I mean, it is happening.
Yeah.
I have older friends who, the idea of somebody being gay would have been, But nowadays, even I see the older people, well, okay, they'll say, no, don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's a positive step, by the way. That's a positive step.
So it's tempered,
Yeah, it's tempered gradually, slowly. Mm-hmm. When they see me looking at them, they know I'm going to be, I won't say who they are, but But it gradually. But I think it's going to get faster. I think the change will get faster.
Yeah.
What is regarded as acceptable, and I mean that in the sense that, well, I'm not causing you any harm. So why are you labeling me or boxing me or criticizing me or why are you offending me? I'm not causing you any harm. So why can't I just live my life and you live your life? I think that's accelerating.
Yeah.
Not everywhere, of course. Not everywhere.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think with that, I think there's also a common sense to it as well.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't go create a religion, the Jedi religion or something like that. Something silly like that.
But it's why the Amsterdam situation is a surprise. For the point you made. It's a very liberal country. Very liberal country. I go there a lot. So this is quite a big development in the last 24 hours. He's not the majority. He's the largest party, but nevertheless, he will form the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not good. In that country, it's happened in Hungary before, of course. Hungary is very right-wing. This is a surprise in the Netherlands. I really am surprised. I'm over there week after next, actually. So teaching, that's going to be interesting.
Well, we say this, but we had Suella 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
and they stir it up.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, will always happen.
Yeah.
And the moment, I think it's happened because global tensions have never been higher since the Second World War.
Yeah.
We've got a cost of living crisis post-COVID for many billions of people in the world. We've got wars. Always have been wars, but they're close to Europe. They're in Europe.
Yeah.
I think this has stirred up extremism again.
Tell me a little bit about some of the personal characteristics of someone who's Gen Alpha. What are they going to be like?
Well,
as just people when they hit 18.
Like, what we think they're going to be like.
Or what we think they're going to be like. Yeah.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, much more aware of environmental issues, much more ethically minded, much more sensitive to brands, much more inclusive, I hope, much more accepting of differences in society. All this is rather,
very utopian, right?
Yes, utopian. Yeah. But I did stress, I hope, this generation, going back to the previous point, they're going to be much more informed. Social media, good or bad, they will filter out, I think, a lot of the white noise or the untruths, the fake news. I think that they're not going to be stupid. I think they're going to be a very intelligent generation who will search deeper into issues more than previous generations. For example, why read a book when you may have a textbook in school? You may have read half it already at some point in your previous years, but when they find something that interests them, they'll dig deeper and deeper and deeper. So they'll become much more specialist, I think, in their knowledge and their understanding. So they're not going to be, as I say, I'm hoping this is going to be the case. They're going to be educated to a higher level. I think a first degree will become the norm. I think master's degree will become increasingly the norm. Higher and higher levels of education.
Will they even need degrees, though?
And who knows what a degree will look like? I said education, but a degree was one measure of that.
Yeah.
But of course, we used this phrase for some years, lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And how you measure that doesn't have to be in the form of a traditional degree. I agree with that, by the way. I think companies will be aware of this as well.
Yeah.
It's not what your degree is necessarily. Well, that will still be important for many, many people. But it's what your knowledge is. How expert are you in this area?
Yeah.
And I can easily imagine, even today, by the way, but the next generation where they become experts in IT without ever having a degree in it. That's happening today already, by
Absolutely.
the way.
You can go on YouTube and you can go...
Exactly. They learn it, correct.
Check everything out for cybersecurity or XYZ.
But you've raised a good question there for me, being in higher education. Will a degree be necessary? Interesting.
Which by extension then means will universities instead have places?
I think universities will still be required, but they will be, as it were, the facilitator of knowledge transfer, of enabling people to explore, along with YouTube, as you just said. So I don't think universities are going to die suddenly. If anything, they're going to expand, because I think education is going to grow and grow and grow.
Right.
But in different forms. There will be scope for a huge range of educational opportunities, not only universities, but I think they will expand.
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of the characteristics, again, without being too idealistic, but I'm hoping it's a more caring, sharing generation, because they are aware of the issues more than ever before. And, the other point I haven't mentioned, again, I think the evidence for this is already very strong. I think they are being born into and will be born into smaller families. I think population growth, while we're over 8 billion now in total population, I think we will peak out in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And then I think smaller families on average will enable the next generation perhaps to care for children more. Large families around the world, we know are a problem in terms of the economics of it.
Sure.
So the world may not grow as fast, but there will be fewer people at some point in time who will have to, share the cake. And I think it won't be a matter of get rich quick. I think this idea that I need more and more and more money, as I said earlier, I think will become less and less important. It'll be about quality of life. It'll be about, I said, before, caring and sharing, looking after society in a smaller family unit, and education being more and more important. I think that describes a society that, well, I think could be a more happier society, but who knows? Who knows? Because again, extremists can come along and disrupt all of this very easily.
Yeah, very, very true.
Doing a job in order to get rich quick will not be the primary motivation. No. Doing a job because it's fulfilling, because it helps society, you're contributing, will be, I think, more attractive. I guess what I'm saying is, to take a traditional economic concept, the idea of profit maximization will be less attractive. But the idea of some sense of what we call satisfaction, satisfying our needs, sort of the Maslow type concept, just having more money in itself doesn't make you happy. So next generation, I think, will understand this more than previous generations, and therefore will take a different perspective on, why am I doing this? It's not just to earn more money for the sake of it. I'm doing it because I am leading a more fulfilled life. And I think, by the way, especially in the UK, I think it's already happening. I think charities in this country are expanding like never before. I hope the next generation will continue this trend, by the way.
Yeah.
As an issue about, how they're attracted into charities. But charity will take a different form. Individuals become more, supportive of others.
Yeah.
Again, sounds very idealistic, but
I see it already, though.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. My daughter, she's 13,
yeah.
and in so much as she would like the latest Doc Martens because it's come back in trend right now, she will still go to the charity shop and buy
Correct.
like a
Correct.
old jumper from 10 years ago of some brand that we probably can't even remember the name of it, but wear it because it's retro. It's like the cool thing to do. So it's in a way creating a reusable, a circular society where things come back around again and being reused. But it's not because it's a poor option. Yeah. It's because it's a cool option, which is a different frame of looking at it.
It's taking a societal, environmental, ethical approach. And that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, generations can change.
Yeah.
From my generation to the current generation, there's been huge changes. So much depends on the environment around them. But to me, the environment today is full of tension at the moment. And therefore, this, I think, will foster some of these positive changes that I'm alluding to.
Right.
But at the same time, in some countries, they could go the other way. It could actually create more nationalism or nationalistic mentality.
Got it.
It could go the other way.
So you're seeing that the tension, it's effectively like what happened with the war, when after the war had happened, then all of the states came together. Yeah. Okay, well, that's, if there is a bright or an upside to it, then I hope that's the case.
One hopes so. I keep saying that, the future is not guaranteed. Prediction about the future is the most difficult thing of all.
Gosh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've covered like pretty much the full gamut there, like who they are, where they'd work, what they look like, how they think.
Probably the big negative thought on my head, especially with the arrival of robots and AI, not just hybrid, but home working on a permanent or mobile working, whatever that means. There is a danger. There's no doubt about it. And in my own notes, I've made this point. Mental health is going to have to be a top. It is a top priority, but it needs to be a much bigger priority. Yeah. And this generation, there is a danger. And thanks for raising that. That if they're not working in an environment with colleagues in the workplace, for example, the traditional environment, then how do they interact? Now, we know how they interact. They interact online. and that has exploded and will continue to explode. The question is, what will that do to them and their mental health and their social skills? There'll be different social skills. You know, how they interact with each other will be different. Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I don't think we can actually give a definitive answer to that.
Yeah.
But it is an issue. I absolutely appreciate, you know, as you raised that. Yeah.
And it actually raises a lot of issues, really. Not issues, but a lot of like extrapolations. Because like you were saying, if you could be whatever you wanted to be and you could do that online, then technically there would be a certain level of gender fluidity. There would be a certain level of, and I don't want to say it in a negative way, but in a way, a kind of like a personality schizophrenia, because you will have multiple versions of yourself. And I see it even in popular culture today, where you have like an artist who will say that they're a different persona when they're on in a concert, etc. They'll go into like a different frame of mind, etc. So on. So it's not too far a stretch from the truth. But this is going to be not just the pop star, but this will be anyone really thinking that they can be whoever, behave however in a virtual online way.
It certainly does enable, or I think the environment we're in now, technology, and the mindset of the next generation will enable individuals to be more individualistic, whatever that means. And that may mean they're more creative individually. How they work is more suited to them. What they buy, you know, again, it's not going to be a mass-produced product. It's a customized to them. You know, we're moving away from the sort of the traditional business models into a world where I think individuals become the most. It's a market segment of one in that sense, because everybody has an opportunity to be treated as individual. And vote with their feet. So I think it's going to be a fascinating time period. But just one point I haven't mentioned yet: how long will this last? Well, I said generations normally are 15 years. We're already, you know, we're into this generation. Are we going to see another generation coming after us that's different as well? I don't know. I haven't thought about that yet. But I think the arrival of robots will create some significant changes in future generations. And I alluded to it earlier indirectly. Those people who are currently in physical jobs, tangible jobs, may find themselves displaced very, very quickly. And even in the service sector. So how many accountants will we need when it's digital tax? How many lawyers will you need when you press a button and the case law is done for you in seconds? How many academics do you need when I become an avatar, you know, and you can listen to the best academic in your subject in the world today? You know, so what will this do to the workforce? And are we going to see the generation after this? And that's, you know, not very far away, by the way, 10, 15, 20 years. Are we going to see a split in society, different subgroups of generations as a result of those in demand and those not in demand?
Right.
This is the challenge now for governments today, by the way. And many governments, because of this, some governments are now having to consider the possibility of a universal basic income. How are we going to give people enough income to live when they may not have a job? Because the robot's doing the job. It's a big topic. Another topic, by the way, for another day, perhaps.
That is a very...
The impact of robots and AI on jobs.
Well, and a combination of the two. And we're talking about at jobs, but also at home as well. Because if the AI is a robot and also is in your home, then effectively, you know, it can be whatever you want it to be. So, and that's, I think, a little bit of a danger in a way from, I say a danger in a certain regard. What I mean by that is that if you have the AI robot at home, you'd want it to be there for you, but at the same time, you should never get it confused with a real human being.
Of course,
right? But again, conversely, at the same time, if other human beings are busy and happy with their robots a certain way, how do you drive people back to being with each other? Maybe the whole
That's
world
right.
slows down in terms of birth rates because, yeah.
Well, again, it could go either way. If people are staying at home, they might have a higher birth rate. But it could go. Who knows?
Yeah, but if we're talking about single people,
yes,
like
true,
one person,
true,
because
true.
you're saying that there's
True.
not going to be multiple, like two kids, there's going to be just one, then that person will get their robot. They'll have their AI
We're
friend.
seeing examples of that in Japan already, by the way.
Yeah.
Where robots become your companion.
Yeah.
In some cases.
And birth rates are going to decline as a result.
That's correct.
In a weird way, is that going to help with the sustainability level of the overall
In a weird way, yes. In a weird way, yes. Because, if we don't have, well, it depends which country we're talking about. But, I mean,
Yes.
Japan's an example at the moment where the population is declining, but the production of robots is increasing.
Yes.
So the robots can help produce enough national income, which then can, as it were, feed society. And I say that. But the question is, how do you distribute that income? That's the big question.
Yeah.
Japan is a very rich country, so they're not yet at that stage of, the small number of very rich companies, as it were, supplying income to everybody. That's a long way away.
Yeah.
But I think it's a topic for discussion. That if you can imagine a world where robots generate 80% of the national income, and they're owned by 2 or 3 companies, how does the rest of us get an income to live on?
Yes.
And that's a real issue. It's being talked about now, the beginning of a conversation about how are we going to make sure society has enough income to survive. Survive's too strong, but to have a lifestyle that is appropriate.
Yeah. Whatever is happening, there's going to be lots of change. That's the only thing that I'm absolutely positive about.
Change is the only constant.
Change is the only constant. And it's good to talk about it as well and get us to think about it, because if we don't think about it, we just sleepwalk into situations. Right. So, it's been very interesting having you here, Joe. And I really, really appreciate the conversation that we've had today. It's been very grounding as well as futuristic. So thank you very much for your time. And we'd love to welcome you back at some point in the future again.
Thank you, Robert. Happy to come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's it for now for this podcast. Do tune in, like, subscribe, and share with your friends and your networks so that they find out a little bit more about what's happening with this new generation to come, Gen Alpha. See you soon.